Man attends ex-wife's funeral, then boy screams, he did it. And this happens. The chapel smelled like lilies and dust. Jim stood at the back, hands in his coat pockets, unsure if he should sit or just turn around and leave. The casket at the front was white, framed in winter roses, Jennifer's favorite. A soft hymn played, muffled by the thick carpet and the tension in the air. People glanced over their shoulders. Some whispered. Others didn't bother to hide their stares. Jim caught the eye of a woman from Jennifer's side of the family. Her cousin, maybe. And she looked away just as quickly. No one said his name. But they didn't need to. It had been 3 years since the divorce. The last year had been the worst. Custody hearings, cold text messages, voices raised over things that used to be small. Jennifer was gone now, and yet the arguments felt like they were still hanging in the air between them, still echoing through this room, even in her silence. The service moved slowly. People stood and shared memories. Some smiled, some cried. A slideshow of pictures played near the altar. Jennifer as a little girl, as a young bride, then with Lucas. Always Lucas. 9 years old, now seated in the front row, small hands folded in his lap, dressed in black, still as stone. Jim had barely seen his son in months. Then came the moment no one expected. Lucas stood up. He pulled his hand from his aunt's and walked straight to the casket. He didn't cry. He just looked at his mother's face, then turned toward the crowd, toward Jim. His finger pointed, small but steady, and then came the words, sharp and clear. He did it! The entire room froze. Someone gasped. A chair scraped the floor. Jim didn't move. Couldn't. Lucas's voice cut deeper than any knife. He did it. Over and over in Jim's head. He saw people glance at one another. Saw a man stand protectively beside Lucas. The air shifted from grief to something colder. Jim backed away slowly and left the chapel without a word. Behind him, the door creaked closed, muffling the sound of 100 unspoken questions. He stepped out into the winter air, where the sky had turned gray and the silence didn't ask anything of him at all. The cold hit Jim harder than expected when he stepped outside. His breath came out in thick clouds, but his chest felt hollow. He sat in his car for over an hour, engine off, just staring at the steering wheel. Lucas's words echoed again and again. He did it. Not a question, a verdict. The burial happened without him. He knew that because he saw the funeral procession pull away from the chapel, black cars lined up in solemn silence. No one looked his way. He stayed in the lot until they disappeared around the corner. Then he started the car and drove nowhere in particular, circling streets he barely recognized anymore. Jennifer had died from a fall down the stairs. That was what the police had said. No signs of forced entry. No signs of a struggle. Just a bad fall. But it hadn't taken long for people to remember the shouting. The way she and Jim had argued in public. Especially about Lucas. Who should have him? Who didn't deserve him? He remembered that night too clearly. The argument. Her words. Sharp. Accusing. His. Louder. Desperate. Then the door slammed and she was gone up the stairs. He had stood at the bottom, fists clenched, chest heaving. He hadn't followed her. Not then. The next morning she was gone. They said it was an accident. But now, with Lucas's outburst, everything felt unstable again. A quiet investigation reopened. A few more questions from the detectives. Polite, but pointed. One of them had asked if he had been drinking that night. He hadn't. But the fact they even asked told him all he needed to know. Jim hadn't spoken to Lucas since the funeral. He tried, sent a message through Jennifer's sister, left a voicemail that stayed unanswered. No one returned his call. No one wanted to. Then, one afternoon, his phone buzzed with a new message. The voice was old, familiar. It was Mr. Howard, the next-door neighbor. He sounded slow, thoughtful. "I've got a camera on my porch, Jim. Been recording since the summer. I saw some of what happened that night. It ain't what people think." Jim sat down at the kitchen table, hands trembling slightly. He listened to the message twice, then again. Mr. Howard had always been the quiet type, not someone to get involved. But now he might be the only one who had actually seen the truth. Jim pulled into the driveway of the old house just after sunset. The porch light was on, casting a dull glow over the front steps. He sat in the car for a moment before getting out. It was the first time he'd returned since the night Jennifer died. The air felt heavier here, like the walls still held a grudge. Inside, everything was just as he remembered. The framed photos on the wall, Lucas's school art taped to the fridge, the dent in the drywall from when the back door swung too wide. But the quiet now felt different, less like a home and more like a memory frozen in place. He stood at the bottom of the staircase, staring up. The spot where she'd landed wasn't marked anymore, but he could see it clear as day. That horrible stillness. Her eyes open, unfocused, blood against the wood grain. He had knelt beside her, called her name over and over. His voice had cracked, his hands had shaken, but she hadn't moved. Lucas had come around the corner a minute later. Pajamas, eyes wide, frozen. He saw Jim bent over her. He saw the panic, the blood, the broken silence. He didn't see the fall. He didn't hear the scream. Just the aftermath. And to a child, sometimes that's enough. That night, Mr. Howard came over with a thumb drive. The old man looked tired but steady. His security camera had picked up more than anyone realized. The footage wasn't perfect, but it showed Jennifer leaving the house in a rush and returning about 15 minutes later. She looked off balance, like something was wrong. She slipped slightly on the porch step, caught herself, and went inside. The camera caught just a sliver of movement through the window after that. A sudden blur, a fall. Then, seconds later, Jim running into view, rushing to her side, his arms reaching out, not pushing, reaching. Mr. Howard stood beside Jim and watched the video one more time. Doesn't look like she was pushed to me. Jim said nothing. He only nodded, slow and tight. The relief didn't come like a flood. It came like a weight shifting, just enough to let him breathe again. The image of Jennifer's fall was still burned into his memory. But now, something else was too. The truth. The truth that he hadn't failed her in the way everyone thought. And maybe, just maybe, he hadn't failed Lucas either. Lucas sat on the edge of the couch, his legs too short to reach the floor. His hands were folded in his lap, fingers twisting the hem of his sweater. He didn't look up when Jim entered the room. The boy's face was still, closed off, like he'd locked every window and door inside himself. Jim paused a few feet away, unsure if he should sit or kneel or speak first. The room felt colder than it should have, even with the heat on. Jennifer's sister lingered near the hallway, arms crossed, watching but silent. She had agreed to give them 10 minutes. No more. Jim sat down slowly in the armchair across from his son. He rested his hands on his knees, keeping his voice steady. You saw me there that night. I know what it looked like. Lucas flinched slightly. Still no eye contact. His lip pressed tight. Jim took a breath and continued, quieter this time. But I didn't hurt your mom. I didn't touch her. I was trying to help her when she fell. From his pocket, Jim pulled a small tablet. He held it out with both hands, not pushing, just offering. The screen showed a paused frame, Jennifer climbing the porch steps. He placed it on the table between them and let the silence stretch. Lucas stared at the screen for a long time before pressing play. The footage rolled, his mother, stumbling, catching herself, disappearing inside. Then that faint blur of movement. And finally, Jim, running, panicked, arms reaching. Lucas blinked hard and set the tablet down. His voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. I thought you pushed her. I thought it was your fault. Jim swallowed the lump rising in his throat. I know. Lucas looked up, finally meeting his eyes. There was something small and trembling behind the boy's gaze. Fear, confusion, and something that looked a lot like guilt. Why didn't you stop her? Jim's voice cracked. I tried. Lucas stood up, unsure at first. Then he took a hesitant step forward, then another. He stopped just in front of Jim, uncertain, until Jim opened his arms and waited. The boy leaned in. It wasn't a dramatic hug. It wasn't loud or tearful. It was quiet and heavy and real. Jim wrapped his arms around him and held on, feeling something break, not apart, but open. Jennifer's sister watched from the hallway. She didn't say a word, but she didn't leave either, and for the first time in weeks, the house didn't feel so cold. The case was closed quietly. No press, no headlines. Just a final statement filed away. Accidental fall, no signs of foul play. The footage from Mr. Howard's porch camera had been enough. Combined with the coroner's report, it told the story the rumors hadn't. Jennifer's death wasn't the result of violence. It was an accident. A horrible, tragic accident. She had been dizzy that week. Her sister mentioned it during questioning. Lightheaded, off balance, maybe low blood sugar, maybe something else. No one thought it was serious. No one expected it to end the way it did. But the pieces fit now, and the silence that had clouded everything slowly began to lift. Jim didn't make a big return. He didn't rush anything. He just showed up, a little more each day. A phone call here, a short visit there. He helped Lucas with homework one afternoon. They watched a movie together on a Friday night. No grand gestures, just presence. The change in Lucas was slow, but clear. He started asking questions instead of staying silent. He brought up memories of his mom, not with pain, but with warmth. Sometimes he'd go quiet afterward, unsure of what he was supposed to feel, but Jim sat with him through it. No pressure, just listening. At the memorial service a month later, the church was fuller than expected. Jennifer's photo sat on a stand near the altar. A few candles flickered in the stained glass light. Lucas stood beside his father, holding his hand tightly. When the time came to speak, he stepped forward on his own. His voice was small but steady. He talked about how kind his mom was, how she always knew what to say when he felt sad. Then he paused, glancing back at Jim. People held their breath. "I said something that wasn't true," he said, "at the funeral, about my dad." A rustle moved through the pews. "I thought he hurt her, but he didn't. He tried to help her. He loved her, even when they didn't live together anymore." Nobody clapped, nobody moved, but something shifted in the room. People no longer looked at Jim like a stranger. Some gave nods. A few even offered quiet smiles. The weight of suspicion finally fell away. Afterward, Jim and Lucas walked down the steps of the church together. Snow had started again, soft and slow. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They just walked side by side, a little closer than before, towards something that looked a lot like healing.